The panel, of course, is Convergence of AI and Blockchain and how DLT addresses transparency and decentralization. So I just want to do a quick introduction for each folk and go from there. To my left, we have Mrinal Manohar, who's the CEO of Casper Labs. And to his left is Teana Baker-Taylor, who's the co-founder of Venice.ai. To her left is Richard Widmann, head of strategy, Web3, Google Cloud. And to his left is Shyam Nagarajan. How did I do that? Good one? Great. He's the global partner, responsible AI, IBM Consulting. He has the term responsible AI in his title. We're going to talk about that. And then replacing Sridhar from Eternis is his partner and co-founder and COO, Ken Lee. So welcome everyone to the panel. So I want to start off by not getting into more of a technical discussion, but a personal question for each one of you on the panel, because we have a lot to cover here. The question is, why AI? You're all very, very smart folks. You have great careers before you started these companies. What was the personal mission and motivation to go into the artificial intelligence industry?
So I'm a computer scientist by education, and machine learning and neural networks was one of my big research interests. Mm-hmm. But why was I interested in that in the first place? Really, it comes down to a book I read when I was a teenager. Many of you have probably read it, Hyperion. It's based on, it's like the Canterbury Tales. And when you read it, you think it's just some normal sci-fi thing. But it's really talking about what are the consequences of AI gone rogue, right? And that made me fascinated.
Yeah, that's great. Teana?
I'm definitely not a computer scientist. I am a reformed transaction banker, and I've spent the last 10 years in crypto because I felt very passionately that the way that we spend and save and have access to money was broken and could be options should be available to people. And so when AI started to become something that regular everyday people could touch and play with and experiment with and really benefit from, I felt like it was really important for us to start, as we intend to continue. I think with crypto, we're trying to get people to change the way they think about money. And obviously generative AI and some of these tools are completely new to humanity. And I think they're just far too important to get wrong. So that's why I got involved.
There you go, the Cape Crusader. Please, Richard.
Yeah, so I think like the other panelists, the way that I got into, my role at Google was really focusing from the crypto angle at first and sort of the power that it had to unlock the ability for an individual developer or a group of developers to create an entirely new monetary system. And then from that, build new markets and all of that. I think that was a massive enabler, and I'm a reformed lawyer, so I don't know if that's as bad or better than transaction banker, but when I looked at what the clients that I was working with were doing and seeing the amount of power that they had at their fingertips with this new technology, it was pretty amazing. And then coming into Google, I think a lot of us think about Google as sort of an innovation company. In many ways we are, but my mandate is really about how do I help other developers and how do I enable innovation of other developers. And so when it comes to AI, much like crypto, I don't think there are two more valuable tools for developers to build kind of the next billion-dollar business. And whether that's like a killer app just for, pure speculative purposes, or whether that's something that's going to, add or create a massive amount of value in consumer or enterprise businesses, I think that's really, the purpose behind all of this. And then really making sure, Teana, you made this point, is, making sure that we get it right, but also making sure that there's equal access. In other words, the difference between having the next killer app, the next Uber, or the next Facebook shouldn't be about access to the technology, access to the right models, access to the compute, access to the data. It really should be about who is building the best product and then let the marketplace decide. And so there's no better place to do that. And that's one of the reasons why, on our team, we've made a big focus around pushing into the AI space.
That's correct. Shyam?
Okay, so look, I've been a technologist all my life, right? Graduated with a CS degree, and then I was a developer, and then eventually did all different things. IBM has been the space for a really long time, but my exposure and my really jumping, all into it happened in 2022 when Gen AI came out, and Gen AI started having impact in real world applications. And one of the things that I quickly saw is how users can get misled without the right guardrails for its adoption. And that's where my interest. I did blockchain before, so I understand the crypto space and I understand the adoption. And one thing very quickly with technology you understand is the right governance allows it to accelerate in the market. And that's where my interest came in. And, I have a lot of stories that I can share with you, what I've seen in the last couple of years about AI that would make you feel without the right governance, you shouldn't do anything without with AI. So that's how my entry came in.
Thank you. Ken?
Yeah. Well, I'd been a venture capitalist for the past 6 years, and invested across crypto and AI. Just saw so many of the smartest minds going into the AI space. I think on a high level, notions of inventing the superintelligence, AI scientists, AI mathematician, AI cryptographers, just a very noble mission. On a more fundamental level, for me, just in the past year, I've always had the same top 4 apps at the bottom of my phone. So phone, text, browser, and email. And for the first time in my entire life, I've switched one of those 4. So the browser is now Claude. And I think there's something there. I think that's going to keep happening across all users, all enterprises. And yeah, I mean, we're only getting started.
That's great. So we've established that everyone here is very well-intentioned and looking forward to this mission together and creating something spectacular and for good reasons. So I want to kick off one of the first questions here actually to Teana. Could you outline to us some of the key technologies for AI and blockchain, and why is the convergence significant?
Yeah, so I think we in the crypto space have been for a number of years making arguments to investors, to policymakers, to the market around what is crypto good for, right? What are the utilities? Where is the killer app? It's still very difficult to use. And when AI applicability, right? So AI has been around for, 20 years, right? But the ability to actually use it to do things has come to the forefront. When you think about how machines are going to engage and interact and transact with each other, there is a very natural affinity for a digital asset, for something of value to be able to be transferred by machines. And I think that the usability of something like a smart agent, where you are able to say, okay, Bob, my smart agent, I have 30,000 USDC that I want you to deploy for 7 days where I'm going to get the highest yield. And that's it. Voice to text, you say that, and Bob says, done. And you don't necessarily even need to know where that is or how that happened. And I think that for crypto adoption and for people to start to feel more comfortable using this as a means of transaction, it is neatly aligned with this machine learning, this super intelligence to be able to kind of help us do these tasks. Then maybe we don't want to figure out how to use all of the Web3 infrastructure, and the machine just does it for us. And we're not very far out from that. So for me, I think getting people comfortable using these tools and not being afraid of them, understanding where responsibility lies and what good governance looks like, but equally, and this is my main message to everyone when thinking about AI, I would love to convince you to replace Claude with something that is private and doesn't spy on you, which is what we built at Venice. So think about every engagement you have with these machines. Sometimes you're talking to a machine. Sometimes you're talking to an AI safety committee within an organization that tells the machine what it can and cannot talk to you about. And all of that information is tied to your identity forever, which might not seem like a big deal today, but 10 years from now, when the machines are talking to each other and they know more about you than you know about you, you might not be so comfortable with that. So I think that as we're getting comfortable with these technologies, we need to understand the potential impact on our privacy, on how we think, on how it impacts the way we come to critical decision making, and be able to feel like we are in control of these incredibly powerful tools that can change our lives.
That's great. That leads into transparency. And this question I'll direct to Shyam is, how can AI be enhanced by blockchain with regards to transparency?
So in the world where we are today, we are surrounded by AI things. I mean, think of it, you said Claude, you use it every day, and Siri and Alexa, and, you write an email and suddenly your email has a co-pilot that helps you. That's our new reality, and we have to live here. Teana, you mentioned about smart contracts being used to, when you tell an agent, we call those AI agents now, and you tell an agent, I got $7,000 and go invest it so I can get the highest amount of yield. What happens in the back end? What decisions are being made on your behalf that allows the system to make decisions? What is the data behind it? Is it conforming to a regulation standard? Is it accurate? And is it actually performant? How do you measure all of these things, right? So transparency is so important. And transparency comes from ability to have a clean data integrity at each and every step of the way, how you're building the product, how you're building the model, how you're exposing and aligning with the data, and so on. So I think this is where the convergence of blockchain and AI really comes in, right? So Gen AI models specifically, traditional models have been built a little bit differently. You got a little bit more leeway in how you do data lineage. But Gen AI models are extremely dependent on LLMs and these foundational models. Foundational models, including OpenAI today, have been trained on a lot of public information that's available on the web. And the source of these information, Wikipedia has got a lot of confidential information on it, and there's no one policing it. Similarly, you have, New York Times sued OpenAI because they used their articles, copyrighted articles, to train the model. This is prevalent everywhere. How do you know what data, you are a corporate or you are an individual and you're using these models to make decisions or advise you or help you do something in your organization? How do you know you're not violating the laws, but also you're making decisions that doesn't violate your own privacy as well, right?
Can I just have a quick 20 seconds? There is a way, and it's called open source frontier models. All the weights are there. So if you're thinking about a decentralized blockchain ecosystem, what better model to pair with the decentralized ecosystem than a open source, potentially decentralized, trained model where everyone can see the weights, everyone knows what the data was trained on, and everyone can then potentially iterate on top of that and further fine-tune for specific purposes. Sure. So we don't have to be only working with black box LLMs.
Sure. Ken, would you like to follow up on that and how you feel blockchain ensures the integrity of AI decision-making?
Sure. So with Eternis, we have a very simple thesis around what we're building, which is we think over the course of the next few years, attested data becomes 1,000 times more valuable. What is attested data? Attested data is private or personal data that is notarized in a verifiable way with notaries then re-verified by a decentralized network of validators. We think this is important to prevent things like deepfakes. This is also, we think, important for personal AI in a world where you do want your agent to not only order your DoorDash for you or book your flights for you, but potentially even vote for you, or do governance for you, or make more important decisions for you. And so in relation to chains, I think there's a lot of things that should be on chain, and there are a lot of things that should never really ever be on chain. But at least for us, what we do believe in is, one thing crypto is very good at is signing things, right? We're signing data, signing transactions. The more signed data that is publicly verifiable, that's out in the world, the better. I have a lot of thoughts around
multiple parts of the value chain around decentralized AI. One specifically being, I just think that most of us are just going to continue to use Claude. It's just that much better and will continue to be. I don't know if anybody has used like a BitTensor wrapper for ChatGPT. I don't know if it's that much more decentralized, but for me, at least, I think in terms of where crypto and AI can meaningfully intersect, it is in proofs, signing data, and having more verifiable data that can be used by personal agents, models, whatever it might be.
That's cool. Mrinal, let's jump right into the heart of this panel with a question to you, which is, how is distributed ledger technology, DLTs, contributing to decentralized AI systems?
So I think Ken and Shyam made a really good point, right? If you think about blockchain and DLT, what does it do that other technologies cannot do? And it's really 2 or 3 things, right? One, it's the best form of copy protection we've ever seen. So anything on it is tamper-proof. Second, it supports multiple parties. Like if you have a database and you want to interact with a database, there's private permissions, you don't know who has access to it, but blockchain allows multi-party access. So I actually see the intersection in AI governance. So the EU AI Act goes into effect starting in February. I think it's going to be a huge moment, just like GDPR or Sarbanes-Oxley. When those things went live, that industry just, went off like a rocket. Yeah. And blockchain is the best technology, really, if you want to track and trace everything that your AI is doing and every element of data that went into it, because it's completely tamper-proof. And secondly, it allows this multi-party access. And then people say hey, blockchain's been said for so many industries, what's different now? What's different now is that there isn't an incumbent tech stack. Every time blockchains try to get into supply chain or something, the CIO or CTO response is, hey, I've got something that's 85% of the way there. I'm not going to go do that brain damage. AI governance is a new industry. We have a chance to build it properly with the right tech stack.
We're going to get to that. Sure. Anyone have anything to add to that?
I mean, there's a couple points, right? There's a natural tension I think we're hearing on the panel, which is, I think there is maybe potentially a false choice out there that the efficacy of AI is directly tied to how much tracking or logging or tracing it's doing about the user activity. And there is right now some proof to that pudding, which is models like Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT have been able to move so quickly and improve so fast because they're sort of working with a power law, which is as people are feeding those prompts into the model's learning and fine-tuning, and as it learns more and more, it gets more, the inferences get more insightful. And so I think there's that tension and it's going to exist. I don't think it's a winner-take-all market. I actually don't think it's also one where, Teana, you mentioned this in the very beginning, it's about choice. I do think there are going to be users who want to use AI and they want guardrails and they want auditability and they want all the things that folks are talking about here as being sort of an asset. I do think there are going to be users who want to use an AI model, much like how they wish they could use certain parts of the products we use today, whether it's social media or search or something else, which is, I just want to engage with this in an ephemeral sense. I want to ask questions and learn about what's out there. I do not necessarily want the sort of the collective questions I've ever asked to be stored in some database to be used against me later or something like that. And so in my view, I think blockchain is interesting because it does create an option or a capability for auditability in a way that I think we do need. But at the same time, I also think we're going to find a bunch of gradations of these models, mixing and matching perhaps closed source data with open source models or closed source models with open source data. And that's where I think the opportunity lies for, I guess, everyone on this panel and for the folks in the audience who are actually looking at this is, what is the right size for the consumer market or the target audience that you have? And how do you avoid falling into some of the pitfalls that I think we all are trying to stay away from when it comes to kind of the crypto ecosystem and carry forward a lot of that ethos. Right. But I agree to in a lot of ways, just smashing AI and blockchain together is probably not the way to do it, which I see some people do sometimes. And I think there are more elegant ways to make these two technologies work together for sure.
Teana, do you have any thoughts on decentralization in terms of the benefits, specific benefits that decentralization can provide in reducing bias and increase fairness with AI results?
Yeah. So again, this is a moment in time and it's still very early and new, but we at the moment don't necessarily have this nirvana of being able to take permissioned private information and overlay it with open source models at the moment. But the major difference today, we basically have closed models and we have open models. And those open models, like I said, you can see how they were trained. There's a lot of published information. The closed models, we don't know. What we do know, though, is that anyone that is creating the model has some control over what the statistical inference that the model runs, how that is delivered to you. And I'm sure lots of people in this room have asked a question about the US election, and ChatGPT has told you flat out that it just won't talk about that. Or asked, one of the image generators to create a picture of Donald Trump having an ice cream cone. This is one that gets brought up all the time. And the model says, I cannot create that image for you. And so there becomes this tension around the control, the almost kind of 1984 Orwellian, tone of what questions are okay for you to ask, what topics are acceptable to explore, how you think is potentially being curated. And if we get used to these things, like potentially we got used to giving away all of our data for free in social media, and now we're like, oh gosh, now Facebook knows everything about us. Well, of course it does, because we told it willingly, freely. So the decentralization of creating the model does provide for multiple inputs to check those biases and multiple inputs to ensure that you have a version of the truth that is as complete as can be. And then equally, when you're delivering those inferences, when you're running that on a decentralized tech stack, there is the ability or the inability for me, for example, to be able to curate for you exactly the inference that you're receiving back, right? I'm not able to control the responses that you're receiving. And I am able to, also protect your privacy, and I am able to use capacity that is not being used. So there is the financial element. So to me, it just seems like a natural fit, especially with blockchain technology, which does most effectively, in my opinion, run in a decentralized tech stack versus a permissioned one.
Thank you. And following up on your point about social media and how we all gave our data willingly to social media, it brings up the question of data integrity and security. And I couldn't think of a better person other than Richard at Google to ask this question. Is how is Google using blockchain to secure data in AI models?
So, right now that we don't have, sort of a data security platform that's leveraging blockchain for AI. I think there's a couple manifestations of where our work focuses on. So when it comes to the data security side of things, we have our own closed source model. It's called Gemini. Okay. But we also have a model garden where users can get access to 30 plus open source models, many of which Teana's talking about. And so I think it goes back to the point on choice, which is, using each of these models. We say open source kind of in a hand-wavy way. Not all open source is created equal. If anybody's a developer here, you know that. And so what we try to do is sort of say, look, if you come here and you want to use Gemini, and you want to use Gemini in a closed environment within your own corporate ecosystem, and you want to have more auditability about where that data flows, you want to make sure it doesn't go in to improve the general Gemini model, we could certainly do that. And we do that today for many of our customers in a lot of different contexts, financial services, media and entertainment, et cetera. I actually think that when you look at where blockchain can be really interesting around, maybe not data security, but data governance, is going back to some of I think it was the misinformation stuff that was mentioned earlier. We see a lot of media and content creators kind of looking at generative AI as sort of almost a boogeyman, right? Where it's, oh my gosh, I've been hearing about, people using, media publisher A's logo over top a fake article with a LLM generated photo of maybe a conflict that never happened. And what we're working with a lot of them today is, figuring out how can you create a data licensing model around content that is, authorized, verifiably published by a media agency, and then offer that data set for free to folks that are training models or perhaps creating model outputs that users may want to say like, oh, well, what happened today? And they'll get like a list of news feeds, and they actually could see the blockchain hash, and they could go to the chain and see like, okay, this is actually a Fox News article. This is actually a CNN article. And there's a source of truth that's not owned by the model maker. It's not owned by the platform that you're even querying. It's actually owned in part by the content creator, but not solely. So I think there's some interesting models there around the data integrity piece, which is how do you verify that the data that is on chain is the data that is the truth, is the real source of truth, such that when a model goes and amplifies it out to 1 million people who ask the same question, they're all getting the truth. And then the other side of it is, how do you build consortiums around content creators to make sure that the data that is being created by them is in fact created by them and can be consumed by these AI models in a way that is cooperative as opposed to competitive? I think the idea of suing ChatGPT and kind of taking this very hostile approach is probably not super fruitful, because the AI is really an output of two things. It's an output of compute, it's an output of data. And if the people who have the data basically say, I'm not going to do anything with AI because of the ChatGPT thing, tongue toaster, well, then what ends up happening is, they'll go and get data from somewhere else, and then we're all worse off. So I think there is an opportunity to kind of, bring those two people together. But I think blockchain can actually play a part in that.
Maybe AI is saying to us that we can't handle the truth.
We have two models that are connected to the internet. And so when you ask a question specifically that is time dependent, so let's say you were going to ask, what are the key highlights of Obama's speech at the Democratic National Convention? And so the model will hit the internet to return the answer to you. And ours cite the sources. And it was one of the things that a journalist in the crypto space, Laura Shin, brought to our attention really early on. She was like, I would love to use this, but I'm a journalist and I need to know where this information came from. And it can't just be, that Meta 3.1 told me, right? But the power, I think, of being able to have a testable data against those articles, right? The sources that are cited, I think that is, another step in ensuring that people understand where the information is coming from. Not necessarily that it's true, but that it's authentic.
Yeah, that it has some good data in, good data out, ultimately. I want to switch over to how smart contracts play into all of this. And I'd like to ask Ken and Mrinal, how can smart contracts be used with AI for automated decision-making? Either one, start off.
Sure. Well, one thing we've been building is basically a simple flow, proof of personhood to an auth, basically delegated auth of the person to an agent having a memory module of attested data, say, for example, their Twitter, their Reddit, and then the agent then being able to elicit some type of preference. In the off-chain world, it works, right? You can have an agent say, hey, based off of your Twitter data, which, we can keep private, it's held within or computed within a trusted enclave, and, we just do a ZKP on top of anything that we reveal. This is fine, right? It can indicate, pro-Trump or pro-Harris. Adding smart contracts allow for it to do transactions, we think, right? So it can do hey, if we want to, create a DAO, and that DAO is 100 of the world's best scientists, and they attest all their preferences, and they can donate resources to one or two specific things. These types of transactions become possible and scalable through smart contracts. I think outside of financial transactions, we don't personally see too many things, but this in and of itself is a huge opportunity. One of the reasons we think that DAOs have not succeeded in the past is because of the time value of money. And people weigh their time over the value of the resources that they can kind of coordinate across within DAOs. But the idea of these network states that Balaji is pushing out, and you can think about autonomous network states in which, based off of preferences, meaningful resources can actually be automated and distributed in a very kind of efficient way. I think this is probably the biggest opportunity for at least smart contracts with financial transactions on top of AI.
Mrinal, when do we get to fully autonomous organizations and economies using AI, blockchain, and smart contracts?
When is a very tough question to answer, but I'll just augment what maybe 5 years. If you put a gun to my head and ask me to make a guess, but Just to augment what Ken said, because I think he made a lot of great points. I would just add two more things on what smart contracts can do, especially with AI. So the first thing is triggers, meaning because smart contracts are Turing complete, you can create any sort of trigger mechanism, right? It's like, hey, if input is this and this is happening, I put an alert to the model, the person responsible for the model to say, hey, it's working out of bounds. And the second, which is actually kind of important, is kill switches. So blockchain is the best kill switch for anything. Meaning, if you just want to shut something down, and you say, okay, the blockchain decides whether this AI gets access to power or not, right? You set that up, and you can write a smart contract that says, if the AI starts doing this, shut it down immediately, right? We're not in those scenarios right now, but think about like, hey, if there's a robot that's made to like chop vegetables, and it suddenly thinks you're a vegetable, right? You want that AI to stop immediately, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And if blockchain is just like the best kill switch to do stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, can I take just the other side of this? I feel like asking how AI and smart contracts works together is like asking someone in the 1900s, how do you change the horseshoes on a car? Like smart contracts are a necessary evil, right? It's the idea that like there isn't a way to talk to the computer in a human readable way. And so we have this necessary evil of having to write code and learn Python or Solidity or Rust. But it's a means to an end. No one writes code for some like moral good of writing code. If it all went away, actually, I think we'd all be better off. I actually think what AI, and this goes back to the agent comment that was made, what ends up happening is that the AI agent just goes and executes these programs, and you don't necessarily need a smart contract. In other words, you could, for example, if there's a vegetable chopping AI and it starts to do something that you don't want it to do, I mean, you can obviously put in a prompt that says, hey, don't do that. Just like there's prompts to say, don't create the image of X, Y, and Z eating ice cream. So in my view, I actually think what generative models do is they are going to collapse the innovation and the development process into a single thing. In other words, the innovators, the dreamers, the people who have the ideas do not have a dependency on how to figure out how to talk to the machine by writing in the right language or the right code. They can actually do all of that in a single swoop, right? And I think that's the really exciting thing. So maybe we'll see half steps where this is interacting, but I don't necessarily think these two things are going to coexist very long. I think actually what ends up happening is, and by the way, I'm biased here because I don't write code. So I would love to not have to worry about learning Solidity and just say, hey, agent, go build me an app that creates a version of Uber in this city that doesn't currently have Uber. Connect to Stripe and accept these payment forms and, go register and get listed on the App Store.
And go.
And that I think that's magic, right?
What also brings up, we touched upon this a little bit, but now's the perfect time to discuss it specifically, is ethics and governance. Shyam, how do you think DLT can enforce ethical AI practices?
Well, I'll start with a couple of examples. First one I want to call out is this happened in a police department in Spain where they were using an AI-supported program to project the probability of an individual. A domestic abuse call comes in and an individual gets brought in and gets registered, and their name goes into the record, and the AI gives a probability of, okay, this is going to be a repeat offender, so keep him in the jail, compared to likelihood of this person not being a repeat offender, let him go and you'd be okay. Now, this program has been running for about 2 years, and they did an audit on this program, and they realized as a consequence of letting go people who shouldn't have been let go, 18 lives were lost, right? The impact of not training your models right with the right data is significant. Our other example is, there was this occurred in one of the largest insurance company in America where they'd been using AI programs to adjudicate claims. And what occurred is this always comes up after an audit occurs after a couple of years of it running. And they realized that it was discriminating against older and aged population. And it has significant impact. I mean, their claims had been denied, they had been put into medical debt, and some of them lost their lives as a consequence of it. So ethics and the right level of governance and the ability to know in advance what data was used to train it is so important. What fairness means in one part of the country or a company is very different from what fairness looks like in a different place. So to have a homogeneous way of how ethics and fairness and bias and all are taken care of in AI models is not practical, right? So here's where blockchain and data integrity programs can come in and help. One, keeping track of what data was used to, identifying and flagging all these bias and discrimination and things like that early on, but also to be able to enforce and reinforce these ethical policies. I'm actually working with a state department that says, hey, we are in the education space and we want to be kind to our students, kind to our staff. How do you enforce such a policy of what does it mean to be kind? Look, everything that we do as human is reflected in the data that's captured around you, right? Data is a representation of your human values. This is organizational values, this is social values, this is your country level values, racial values, everything is represented. So how do you have the right data that where you preserve the integrity, but also take the necessary steps to compensate for the biases that's built into the data? So that's kind of what I want to share.
That's a great answer. We could talk for another hour about AI for sure, and I've got so many more questions. I have to jump to the end though because we're almost out of time. So I'm going to do a round robin here of an obvious question, which is in each panelist's opinion, what is the future of AI and DLT? And maybe you can sum it up in 15 seconds or so each.
Yep, I think DLT will do two things to AI. It'll be the governance layer for AI, and second, I think it'll be the transfer layer of things like curated data sets, curated pre-built models, etc. So transfer and governance layer.
That's great. Teana?
Yeah, I'll just reiterate what I said at the beginning. I think it's going to be the rails by which the extensions of ourselves are able to engage and transact with others. But again, I would just reiterate that we really should start as we intend to continue. And instead of relying, AI ethics totally set aside, but the governance element, I think if someone doesn't have your data to begin with, they don't have to protect it.
Yeah.
And so really think very carefully about where you're sharing the information that you're sharing and how dear and important it is to you or your family, because we are going to amass a lot of it and the machines are going to be able to use it.
Great. Richard?
I think AI is going to help bring more developers and therefore more people, more consumers on chain faster by reducing the friction that I think folks have in the fragmented layer one ecosystem and some of the things we talked about. So I'm actually very excited for that. And I'm also excited for the idea that maybe I don't have to write a smart contract to do a swap, but I could just ask an AI.
Really anti-smart contract here. He doesn't want to do anything. Shyam?
I think blockchain is going to be a layer of innovation on top of AI. And I say that as the future is in the concept of called federated AI learning. And federated learning can occur when you can preserve the privacy of the data and still share your learning with the next party, so there can be, group level learning and global level learning that occurs. So it's going to accelerate innovation. It's the safe rails to do that.
That's great. Ken, bring it home.
I think attested signed data becomes 1,000 times more valuable. I think this is the thing that cryptography can do for AI. I think proofs become first citizens, and all applications will need consume proofs in order to execute actions. I think one thing that hasn't been talked about, and I'll just leave it, or say it, but I think crypto cannot meaningfully do anything in AI without diving into hardware and doing open source hardware. I think teams like WorldCoin and Solana Phone actually are trying to do something where, and we can talk about all the decentralization, but if everything's just going through an iPhone and you're trusting Apple's trust execution environment, there's still like a centralization model there. So I do think that's an area that more crypto founders and teams should be exploring.
That's great. Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.